Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. Here I got a Vespa LX150 from, I don't know, somewhere between 2006 and 2009. It's got the carburetor. 2011 to 2014 they had fuel injection. So today I'm going to show you how to do a valve adjustment and valve check. A lot of do-it-yourselfers tend to forget that step and they just want to change the spark plug. And oftentimes you'll just end up breaking the spark plug because it's not exactly an easy job to do the spark plug on a Vespa ET4, an LX, S150. Pretty much this motor is even found in the Piaggio Fly. Pretty much all the Vespa and Piaggio products had a 150 or 125 motor starting in about 2000, 2001, all the way ending around 2014. So this is referred to as a 2-valve leader motor. This is the designation for this motor. So it's got 2 valves per cylinder, one for the exhaust, one for the intake. A nice rugged motor, certainly proved itself. Tons of Vespa LX and ET4 still running around here in San Diego. So now you're asking how often you want to check and adjust the valves on this motor. Well, they say the first one comes up at 6,000 kilometers, which coincides with 3,750 miles. And then thereafter, you do it at 18,000 kilometers and then 36,000 kilometers. So the interval kind of gets, you can go much further, you know, pretty much 7,500 miles between the valve adjustments, or 12,000 kilometers essentially between the valve adjustments. Once you do that first one, it's 6,000 kilometers or 3,750 miles. This one's pretty low miles, but I'm just going to show you the exercise of how to do it. And of course you want to set yourself up for success and have all the right parts on hand before you start this job. And of course you can find all these parts at ScooterWest.com. Here's the standard spark plug, the NGK CR8EB. If your scooter's never had a spark plug out, it might have the Champion spark plug, which was notorious for failure, cracked insulators, and just other issues. The NGK plug, they never tend to have any issues. Heck, they'll go way beyond the service interval. You know, you can leave this plug in here for 10,000 miles, it'd probably be just fine. They have a one-time use hose clamp for the breather hose. I just recommend replacing with a standard worm gear style hose clamp. Scooter West part number HCL6 Mini is the part number on that. There's 2 gaskets that are pretty handy to have. The most important being the valve cover gasket itself. Part number is 829817. If you have an older Vespa 150, such as ET4, the valve cover gasket unfortunately has been discontinued. But there is a trick. This little hump is the only difference. You can actually carefully cut that out with a razor blade and then super glue the gasket, a Vespa LX gasket, together if you need to use or replace a gasket on a Vespa ET4 that doesn't have the air injection system. So the Vespa LX has additional emissions control system, and that's why they changed the design of the valve cover gasket. But it is possible to use this gasket with a little modification to this little hump right here. In a pinch, you could grease up the gasket. I do not recommend smearing it with silicone to put it back on like you would with a car head gasket or oil pan. Scooters are getting pretty old, so other gaskets and other rubber parts are starting to deteriorate. This is that little plastic breather cover that's on the side of the valve cover. I'd recommend replacing this O-ring as well. 287989, pretty inexpensive O-ring. So you're pretty much set up with the parts you need, 4 different parts. As for the only special tools, you'll need a set of feeler gauges, specifically a 0.10 and a 0.15 millimeter, which coincides with 4/1000 or 6/1000. These are nice, handy Motion Pro feeler gauge sets. We do have them available at the Scooter West web store. It's TOOLVALVE, I think, part on there, and they actually come with 3 of them, but you only need 2 of them for the Vespa LX. All right, before we get started, I want to show you all the tools that you need to successfully do this job. A few more tools than you probably think. So first of all, to remove a spark plug, of course you need a spark plug socket. Yeah, the toolkit comes with a spark plug socket. It's pretty difficult to use. I recommend getting a proper 5/8 spark plug socket. And you also want to have the associated combination wrench that can turn the hex on the end of the spark plug. It's going to make it a lot easier. Removing the valve cover itself, it's got 6mm bolts that use an 8mm head. The easiest setup to have is a 1/4" ratchet with a wobble 8mm. It's certainly possible to use a wobble adapter with an 8mm standard socket on it. You can even do it in a pinch without the wobble. Also a helpful tool is a 8mm ratchet. Not necessary. 2 types of screwdrivers you need, number 2 Phillips and a pretty thin bladed, flat bladed screwdriver. To get the spark plug cap off, these are always pretty handy to have, whether you drop something. A nice set of long needle nose. You don't necessarily need to have these like Matco branded ones, but I think they have them at Harbor Freight. I'm sure you can find them on Amazon. Remove the original hose clamp on the valve cover for the breather. Diagonals are going to be the best way to do it. There's other ways to do it, other ways to cut that stainless steel, but it's pretty hard to cut through. If you're going to change the gasket on the valve cover itself, a T20 Torx driver is pretty useful. Knife's always useful. You're going to definitely need feeler gauges. We have these available on the Scooter West web store for valve adjustments. And the Maxima waterproof grease. That's always handy for a lot of different tasks when you're servicing your Vespa. So let's get right to it. All right, so go ahead and pull the pet carrier out. Wonder why they call it the pet carrier, because they do. In North America, they do come with a nice little sticker that says no pets, so I guess they didn't want you to put your kitty underneath the seat. I'm gonna take some long needle nose pliers. Right now I have the scooter on a center stand. That's actually gonna change shortly. 2 things we're gonna do. We're gonna actually pop the spark plug cap off, and these long needle nose, you can kind of lever between this plastic cover right here, which are the shrouds of the engine, and just pull the spark plug cap out. And sometimes it's kind of gonna stay in place. And also you'll find that sometimes this hose is in the way, so I'll pop that out of the clip. Only the Vespa LXs have that hose. And then we're lifting this little spark plug access door out of the way. And we're doing this before we pop the engine off the center stand. So cap, kind of gotta lever it out of the way here. And see how the whole cap and the rubber are off to the side? Then you can pull this little door out of the way. And I'll tell you right now, you're not gonna be able to get that spark plug off easily. Next thing we're gonna do, you can remove that screw if you like, this one topmost screw, but pretty easy to do in the next steps. So here's your breather hose. You might want to check this breather hose. A lot of the rubber hoses, you know, on this age of a scooter are starting to deteriorate. This is the original one-time use clamp. I'm using a pretty large set of diagonal pliers, and I'm gonna actually cut that clamp off. And that's the best way to safely remove this, because that part of the valve cover is plastic, the breather cap. And if you crack that, you're going to be replacing more parts than you need to. So I just went ahead and cut that clamp. You can dispose of this at this point, because we'll replace it with a reusable clamp. So at this point, you want to take the scooter off the center stand. And you can see the whole motor drops down. And of course, I have a nice lift with a wheel clamp. There's many other ways to do this. I've showed how to make a real basic wooden holster for your scooter, kind of hold the front end, keep it stable on a big piece of plywood. And at this point, the motor kind of drops down a little bit, and you kind of need that to get the valve cover out of the way. But before we go any further, I'm going to remove the spark plug. So I have a 5/8 spark plug socket with a hex on the end. It's just a standard spark plug socket, and a wrench that will go on that as well. So go ahead and kind of feel your way around. This is a really nice socket. It has a magnetic thing. Some of them have the rubber piece that's a little harder to use. And at this point, you can easily get in there and loosen the spark plug. And a lot of times the spark plug is just initially tight because it's up against the sealing washer. And at this point, I can just spin the spark plug off and we'll be able to look at it. So this is by far the best way to remove the spark plug, is have the front wheel chock, because it's pretty hard to get the spark plug out when you have it up on the center stand, believe it or not. on the 3-valve engines is much, much easier. You actually access the spark plug through the spark plug cover. This scooter kind of has a spark plug cover, but it's more or less access for your valve cover, and that's it. I'll show you that next. So I'm just getting my hands in there, spinning the spark plug off. It's a long reach plug, so it's quite a few threads. Still looks pretty good. But we're gonna go ahead and replace that. Not really worth reusing it. The NGK spark plugs, as long as they haven't been dropped, they're gonna be at the correct gap, which is 0.6, 0.7 millimeters. See what this has. It already has the NGK plug, the CR8 EB, so that's what we're gonna replace it with. All right, so take a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, remove that single screw. Make sure you keep this. A lot of people lose these because the screw comes out and then the cover goes flying out. Kind of gives a hot rod look. If you do want to have your valve cover exposed, maybe you get a little bit better cooling. Who knows? Of course, you know, with the workshop, I have the best tools, so having a nice little 8mm wobble is going to make it the easiest. It is possible to do it with just a straight socket. I think that upper one you may want to do with a little ratcheting wrench. So kind of just going between all 4 of these fasteners. There's no oil that's going to pour out, in very little, small quantity. And kind of once you have them all loose, you'll be able to spin all 4 of the fasteners off. They're all, what is that, M6 by about 20. And the uppermost one. So the upper left valve cover bolt, it can be accessed with a little ratchet like this. Kind of makes the job a little easier. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get the valve cover out of the way. This is your throttle cable. Sometimes it's in the way a little bit, so you can hold that out of the way. And it takes like a little special rotation. Like you can see it kind of rotate it, and it pulls right out. Now, as you see, the valve cover gasket is actually missing because it's still stuck to the head right there. So right now I have the ignition on, spark plug's out, and you could either use a Kickstarter if your Vespa LX or ET4 is equipped to turn the engine over, or you can just bump the starter. And there's going to be 2 marks that you're looking for. One will be an arrow with 4V. You want to ignore that mark, and you're going to look for specifically a mark that says 2V. And I'm just bumping the start switch to get it close. And believe it or not, since there's no spark plug in there, oftentimes you can just carefully turn this end bolt. You don't want to loosen the camshaft, and typically you don't want to go backwards, but I've never seen an issue with these. And you can see the 2V mark right there, and it's on that cam link, and it lines up with that dot, and that's specifically top dead center on the cam. Alternatively, you could just keep on bumping the start switch, so you just quickly bump the start switch until it does approximately line up. It can be about a link off, and your valve adjustment will still be perfect. All right, so we'll start with a more critical adjustment, which is your exhaust valve. That's gonna be your lower valve, and I located a feeler gauge that's 0.15 millimeters or 6/1000. Let's just see how that feels at top dead center. So I'm gonna go ahead and slip that in there. It's very, very loose, so I can just slide that through. I'm gonna go to one size up, 0.20 or 0.008. Check that out. That even almost fits in there. See, so I think we just need to go ever so lightly tighter on this so this feeler gauge isn't falling out. It's just a little bit on a loose side, but keep in mind, a loose valve is a happy valve, so that's better than a tight valve. If you have a problem where the scooter is difficult to start with when it's hot, that's oftentimes the first thing you want to go to is check your valves. So I'm loosening the lock nut. I'm doing it with a combination wrench, and I have a flat blade screwdriver, and I'm going to go ahead and tighten that in. And you feel just a little bit of resistance, just ever so slightly, then hold the screwdriver tight. And oftentimes when you're tightening the lock nut, it wants to tighten the adjuster as well. So that's pretty critical that you don't turn the screw. And See that? It just got ever so slightly some resistance. The next larger size, there's no way I'm fitting that. And the next smaller size is very loose. So that's a perfect adjustment. There are other types of feeler gauge that called no-go, go-no-go style. But I find these work very well and they're pretty easy to use. For the intakes typically always run a little tighter. So I have the 4,000ths or 0.10. Let's see how that feels. And believe it or not, I can't even get that in there. So right now, it's pretty tight. Almost a little bit too much drag. So I would probably leave that alone, but just for the sake of adjustment, go ahead and get our wrench on here. Loosen that lock nut, and we're gonna go in with the screw, and right about there, I could kind of just feel right when there's just a little bit of resistance. I'm gonna hold the screwdriver tight and tighten that lock nut. Make sure it's pretty tight. And I left the feeler in there and that feels good. There's just a little bit of drag. Like when I put the correct size feeler gauge, you'll feel a little bit of drag and that's perfect. So now the valves are set, nice and easy with the 2-valve engine. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and prepare the valve cover for reinstallation. I wanna clean up with something like brake parts cleaner if you don't have a parts washer. You need the debris off it. I'm just gonna wipe it. It's pretty clean and low miles. Whatever residual grease on there. It's more important to surface where the gasket goes is nice and clean. And next, we're gonna go ahead and remove this cover here and replace the gasket. It doesn't look like it needs to be replaced. I don't see any oil weeping of it. There's not exactly oil pressure behind it, but there's like oil vapors behind that cover. So that's oftentimes why you would need to replace that. I'm using a T20 Torx bit, or like a star style driver. So the T20 size. And just like modern cars where everything's made of plastic, this thing's made out of like a reinforced nylon. It's got steel inserts in there. And there's kind of a lot of friction to these screws. They kind of, I guess they call it like a thread forming machine screw. So it actually cut the threads. The first time they were installed, they cut the threads in aluminum casting. They didn't actually tap them during the machining process of this head. It's kind of a rudimentary process, but it seems to work just fine. And at this point, you can pry that right off. Look at that gasket. Look how flat it is. The heat, the age, it's just been under pressure for all those years. It's kind of what you expect. If you're having difficulty getting out, of course the knife's gonna help you out. And do the same, you could wipe this out. Sometimes there's, on high mileage, you'll see crud in there. It'd be worth cleaning that buildup that's in that cover. So go ahead and take your gasket, Scooter West part number 487989. And pretty handy to have the maximum waterproof grease, Scooter West part number grease. And you don't need to get too much on there. It's kind of got a nice rectangular shape to it. Make sure it stays in place. The grease, see, it's not going to fall out. And we'll go ahead and put this little cover back on. Of course, it's totally optional. It's not always needed that you need to replace that gasket, but come on. If you're in here, it's an inexpensive part. Just take the extra step. So I'm kind of holding that. That's probably the best way, so it kind of keeps it in place. This stop, we'll come back to that. Of course, a power driver would make this nice and quick. So if you're tired of seeing me turn a screwdriver, go and feel free to skip ahead. Maybe skip ahead this whole section. Maybe you don't care about the breather cover. All right, so if you watch this all the way through, me tightening 4 screws, what's my name? Is it Rocket, Robert, Robot? What is it? Because I've had Radar, that's another one. So I've had people call me all 4 of those names, but it's really just robot. Pretty straightforward, got that installed. Same treatment, I got grungy hands. We got the 829, 817 valve cover gasket. And again, I was talking about this earlier, the ET4 does not have this little cutout right here. So it's possible to carefully razor blade this and glue the gasket together if you need it. And if you need a gasket, you're just gonna, you know, your best bet is finding this one, because that ET4 one's been discontinued for several years now. Kind of a shame. No one makes a reproduction valve cover gasket. So I kind of pretty liberal on the grease on this one, because pretty easy if you don't have this in, you know, sitting in this little groove correctly, and you're trying to manipulate that valve cover, it's really easy to pinch this gasket. And believe me, I've done it in the past, back when I was a tech doing a lot of the valve adjustments. Unfortunately, these days it's my techs doing it, and you know, these scooters are getting old, so we don't do valve adjustments on these as frequently as like the 3-valve Primaveras. It's not going to hurt anything by having too much grease. Just kind of will track some dirt on the outside. But I'll tell you one thing, with that much grease, the gasket's not going anywhere. So let's go ahead and return to the scooter, and we'll get the valve cover reinstalled. All right, so we'll go ahead and put the valve cover in, kind of the larger sides first. And kind of got to give it a special rotation as you get it into place, because there's this little clip that's always in the way, and that's what holds the throttle cable. And you can see I went in, rotated past this little clip, and popped it right into place. And with that much grease on those bolts, or on the valve cover gasket, not the bolts, the gasket's not gonna come out of its little groove or anything. It's gonna stay in place. Next step is get all these screws started. Do that typically by hand. Kind of even reach to this bottommost fastener there. And then the upper one I showed you how to remove with a little ratchet if you want to. But typically with installation, I just like to wobble and just kind of go between all 4 of these fasteners, spin them on. With the new gasket, it's going to have like kind of a different feel as it's tightening down, because that gasket's actually round, so it's kind of occupying some of the space, you know, and compressing as you tighten these screws. All right, so now they're all hand tight. If you want to get a torque wrench in there, about 7 foot-pounds, all you need to do. Go between the screws, kind of an X pattern. Probably could use a little bit longer extension, but I already grabbed this one, so. And you can feel right when the gasket compresses, because the screws get quite a bit tighter and much less of a rotation. And there's pretty much how you do the valve adjustment on your Vespa LX. So we'll go back under there. Of course, we need to install the spark plug. This little door can go back into place. Single Phillips, make sure you tighten the screw. Don't want to lose that precious painted spark plug door. Fun fact, a lot of dealers back in the day, they would actually swap the doors, the floorboards, the glove box to kind of make a mix match part, kind of part spin bike before Vespa was switching up the colors from the factory. And around 2011, they had 2 Vespa LX fuel injected bikes called the College Edition. And it was like, one looked like a candy cane, it was white and red. The other one was white and a baby blue color. So I got a brand new CR8EB. Pretty inexpensive spark plug. It's the correct one when you want to use. It's got like the solid steel end on it. It's never been dropped, so the electrode straps in the right position. And sometimes you just want to get it into your spark plug socket, kind of go from behind the bike and it's really easy to cross these. We fix them for a lot of people because you got to feel your way around. Not exactly easy. Get the correct angle because the spark plug goes in an angle into the head. Sometimes you want to just stick your finger, kind of feel where the hole is, so it's right about there. Believe me, I haven't done this job actually in quite a long time. The original videos that I did for doing services on Vespa LXs were 10 years ago when these scooters were new. So yeah, I feel that's going in, threading really nice. And a new spark plug actually threads in easier than the old spark plug. So old spark plug had, you know, some carbon and oil buildup on it. So it's just taking some patience, spinning the spark plug socket by hand until it stops. And by far the easiest way to tighten a spark plug is by putting a wrench on the end of your spark plug socket. It's possible to get a ratchet in there. You can feel that the gasket compressed, and that's about as tight as you need to go. I probably went another 1/2 to 2/3 of a turn to compress this gasket right here. And obviously reinstalling a used spark plug will feel a lot different than a new one. Spark plugs are pretty inexpensive. They're difficult to change on these scooters. Your best bet is just always put a new one in. So you can put the spark plug door in right now. And I have that hose still out of the way. You want to engage this. And it's pretty important that you replace this little door. I've seen several customers, they'll do their own spark plug change. And for some reason, they just decide, oh, it's appropriate to throw that little piece away. Well, that's part of the cooling system. That's the shroud that keeps the air on the spark plug. It's also pretty important, you know, as these spark plug caps age, they can get pretty loose and they'll have a tendency to want to pop off. I'm kind of using my fingers to kind of manipulate that spark plug socket in there. You can actually pull the spark plug socket through the front, you know, where we did the valve adjustment, and inspect it further. I should have did that when I was doing the valve adjustment. Now you got to really push it. You're gonna hear a little click when it snaps in. So I'm gonna use both hands. That snap, that's the spark plug socket snapped in place. All right, so here's your breather hose. You don't want to forget that. I have a reusable. Here's your breather hose. I have a reusable number 6 hose clamp on there. So again, push the hose on. And we'll go ahead, get our flat blade screwdriver. I'm holding the clamp in place. Make it nice and easy. And that pretty much sums up doing a valve adjustment on your Vespa LX ET4. Pretty much any 2-valve Vespa from 2014 and prior that has a 4-stroke motor. I mean, all these steps actually apply for the 2-valve 50cc engine. Very similar steps to the GTS. The GTS actually flipped the whole motor down. I've covered that probably in a couple videos over the years. But that's pretty much it. We'll put the bucket in. Obviously motor, I know it's gonna run right with the correct clearances on the spark plug. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks if you watched every single step and you know one of my several different names that I hid somewhere in this video. Showed you were paying attention to a very long valve adjustment video. If you're wondering how hard it is, to do this job, I get that question a lot here in my own service department. People ask, how hard is it? Well, that would be the similar question if I was just, you know, a regular doctor, practitioner, you know, family doctor, and somebody came up to me, can you do a heart surgery? Rebuilding a motor is obviously going to be something that's much more difficult. It needs specialized tools. Something doing service like this, it definitely isn't for an inexperienced do-it-yourselfer. I would say an intermediate do-it-yourselfer. If you've changed oil, you're pretty familiar with tools. You have a good selection of tools like I have right here. This is pretty much all the tools I needed to change a spark plug and do a valve adjustment. I would just consider it like an intermediate job. So it's hard for me to speak of what your experiences are. Obviously, you're watching my videos a lot. Your experiences are probably going to get a lot better. There's probably a lot of other videos out on YouTube working on other engines and other machines, and just getting your hands dirty and understanding how tools work will, you'll gain better experience. But as a first timer, say you've only changed oil on your scooter and you just want to tackle doing a valve adjustment, I'd really be careful and watch your steps, because doing this kind of job, if you make some errors, you could cause some engine damage as well. So keep that in mind. Well, thanks for watching. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. I'll see you on the next one. I'm excited to start doing more videos on older modern Vespas and certainly my classic Vespas. See you on the next one.